Good morning. You might know our organisation as the Forestry Commission, but in 2019 we had a name change and became Forestry and Land Scotland. However, for the last 100+ years, we've been managing the nation's forests and land. And we manage 9% of Scotland as a whole, and that's a lot of land. Basically, everything we do hangs off the map. So spatial data is a really big, important part of how we manage Scotland's national forests and land. And we don't just plant trees and harvest trees. There's a whole range of business activities that our organisation is responsible for. For every part of the estate that we manage, we have a land management plan which articulates our objectives spatially and in time frames of decades, 50 to 100 years in some cases. Thinking spatially and planning spatially is really, really important to us. And we harvest and market 3.2 million cubic metres of timber every year. That's a huge amount of timber that we need to think about where it's coming from spatially and where it feeds into sawmills all around Scotland and supporting Scotland's forest industry. And we manage over 600 buildings on the estate as a whole. And that means that we can be offices, to depots, to sheds, and again, those assets, we need to know where they are and the condition they're in. And renewable energy, 3.2 gigawatts of energy into Scotland's energy mix each year from Scotland's national forests and land. That critical infrastructure has to be well planned and sited spatially and understand how we integrate that into the land we manage. And we manage for biodiversity and wildlife management. Some of Scotland's most rarest species we're trying to protect and enhance on the National Forest estate. And on the estate, there's over 100 community projects that provide benefits to our local communities that we work with. And we think spatially and we zone the estate in relation to providing opportunities for cycling, walking, horse riding. And it also allows us to manage large-scale events and site those appropriately, like we did last month, the UCI Mountain Bike World Cup in the Tweed Valley. And we build roads and bridges, so 10,000 kilometres of roads and 1,600 bridge assets that we currently manage within the organisation. And again, the condition of those, understanding those assets, where they are and the condition they're in is really important to us. So I say that to set a little bit of context. For each of those parts of the business, our staff are using GIS to do their jobs. And we've been working with Esri now for 25 years in our organisation. And in the beginning, GIS was very specialist. It was a really niche tool that only a few members of staff were able to use. And as it's grown, and we've grown with it, we've now got a cloud-managed GIS service from Esri, and that's facilitated by our partners in Forest Research who help develop our corporate GIS. And thanks to the cloud and the web, we've seen a huge explosion in the number of people using GIS in the organisation. And as I say, since 1919, when we started out, maps have been fundamental to how we go about our work. It's hard to emphasise just how important maps are to our staff and our organisation in terms of planning how we manage Scotland's national forests and land. So we've been continually developing that corporate GIS over the last 25 years or so with Esri. And it's nice to reflect on that journey as I was preparing for this presentation today and to think about what's next, because I think that really is quite exciting. GIS really did transform our business in the late 90s, and it continues to transform what we do as an organisation. So here's the really great bit about where we've got to as an organisation. We're now in a position where we truly use ArcGIS as a total platform within the organisation. With the move to the cloud and the web, it's given us a massive increase in the accessibility of our data to our staff. We've got people in our organisation that use GIS, but they don't think of themselves as GIS users. They're accessing dashboards, they're accessing web map apps, they're accessing mobile apps on their phones to collect information. We've got over 800 licenses in use in our organisation. So staff are interacting with that on a daily basis. And more recently, the move to adopt a range of products on the platform has unleashed a huge step change in how many of our staff are able to benefit from GIS in their jobs. One big reason for that explosion in the use of GIS users in our organisation is the introduction of mobile apps, such as field maps for ArcGIS. And this app is used in so many use cases across our organisation. And similarly, Survey 123 is used across lots of use cases in our organisation to quickly create forms and capture data consistently in the field for things like tree health surveys, bridge asset inspections, buildings asset management, and so on. So using these apps as part of the ArcGIS platform allows us to improve the quality of information we're capturing. It allows us to give clear rule messaging to those who are capturing that information, and it allows us to audit the data as it's coming in. So it's making it easy for hundreds of staff, and the simple, easy-to-use tools encourages staff to use it. They want to use it. And ultimately, it creates a system of record for all our key business information on a single platform with multiple options for our staff to manage and access that data. So that's some of the wider context in our organisation. I'll just say a little bit more about some really exciting and innovative work that we're doing in relation to wildlife management. So our challenge and our need is to better understand wild deer populations spatially across Scotland. And to help us with that, we've partnered with BH Wildlife Consultancy. And this work is involving use of drones and GIS to help us better understand wild deer populations spatially and how we can reduce the negative impacts of deer on new woodlands and fragile habitats. And deer have become the biggest contributor to biodiversity loss, funnily enough, in Scotland. They're also the biggest threat to newly planted woodland. Woodland that we need to create as a nation as part of our ambitions towards net zero and the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis. So the deer population in Scotland, though, it's doubled in the last 30 years. The top left of the dashboard here is showing that population increase. Too many mouths and hooves nibbling at young trees and trampling vegetation and fragile habitats is a massive problem in Scotland. And in Forestry and Land Scotland, we're privileged and entrusted to manage many of Scotland's iconic landscapes, like Glen Crerran that you see here from this drone shot. And this is an area that we'll see more of in the technical demonstration that comes later. So these landscapes are vast, and as you can see, deer don't respect boundaries. They move across land ownerships, so we need to be able to collaborate with other land managers at a landscape scale to reduce the negative impacts of deer. We have a requirement to better understand these populations spatially, and we need to be able to easily share this data with neighbouring land managers to help inform our working together at a landscape scale. So to give you an idea of the problem that we face, I want to show you a couple of images here. Now this landscape, it's beautiful, but is it healthy and is it resilient with diverse flora and fauna and trees that are naturally regenerating? Now I'd suggest that it's not. At least it wasn't when this image was taken. So to better understand deer populations, if we do that, we can reduce the negative impacts of them. And look what happens when we get that more in balance. Young trees galore, Mother Nature's doing her bit, and trees are able to regenerate naturally because the browsing pressure from deer has been reduced. It's a much more healthy and resilient landscape. There's still a place for deer, it's just in a more balanced way. So deer management is a really important part of the work we do to help the government meet its climate change and biodiversity targets in Scotland. But presently in our forests, a lot of our forests, the deer densities are just too high, and therefore we need focused, targeted efforts. We need to focus our resources where to most effect to reduce the overall populations. And that's particularly important to us when you think that we plant 25 million trees a year as an organisation, and at any one time in our estate, 150 million of those trees are vulnerable, susceptible to deer damage. And that we also have to protect and support 1,000 species, including a lot of protected species, and ancient forests like our ancient Caledonian pinewoods and Atlantic rainforests in the west coast. And ultimately, we're trying to produce timber, 3 million plus cubic metres of timber each year that goes into Scotland's forest industry, wood processing industry. So the problem is you can't have nice big trees without baby trees. But those baby trees need protected. So our big challenge is that we need to understand those deer populations and then plan appropriate management interventions. And to do that, we rely heavily on field surveys to acquire the data. Those interventions to manage deer can sometimes be controversial, with neighbouring estates who have different objectives to us. So as a result, our management activity has to be based on solid evidence. And Scotland as a whole needs to urgently increase the levels of deer management to protect biodiversity and young trees. And we need better data captured more quickly that we're able to share more quickly with other land managers. So that's where the use of drones and GIS comes in. And we've partnered with BH Wildlife Consultancy to help us with that. And Ben's going to say a little bit more about that now in the next few slides.
Thank you, Doug. Just move on. So BH Wildlife Consultancy has drawn drone operations with GIS and our background in wildlife management. And whether it's looking for the most rarest of species or counting the most abundant, we've been working across the UK. You can see our coverage there, and we're even starting to look into Europe as well, using this technology. So we've been leading in this niche methodology by combining these platforms together. And it's really just now, in recent years, paved the way for a new survey method. And what we've noticed in particular is the drone platforms themselves have really pulled all of this technology into, that was before very separate. So if we've round back 15 years ago, the first thermal imagery that I worked with when I was with a forestry organisation was a pair of binoculars that were several kilograms that came from those ex-military. Now, this device was very difficult to handle, it had short battery life, and it needed special sign-off from Scottish ministers just to get the technology into the country. Now, if you fast forward to present day, and the drones we're using, we have a wide-angle camera, thermal imagery camera, a sort of super zoom optical, and a built-in laser rangefinder in one unit that can be mounted to a drone. The drones as well, just in the last couple of years, have got IP ratings that allow them to be flown in rain conditions, pretty strong winds, and in extreme temperatures. So this speeding up of drones and the camera technology and making it relatively cheap in terms of what it was 15 years ago is what has made it a new survey method that we can use now. And the software we're using, ArcPro, is the sort of main desk-based software we use, field maps for collection, drone to map, and we're using a couple of specialist add-ons, especially when it comes to the statistics. So yeah, before field maps, we were using paper maps that reduced accuracy and it required double handling of data. So field maps really changed that, and it meant as well that multiple operators could feed into the system and meant we're seeing the data live. It's now our primary tool for data collection for our methodology, which is defined as a minimum count methodology. So the aim of what we do is to cover the whole area with the drone in a methodical way, and the built-in abilities of field maps and the drone mean that we can use geo-references both within the software and the drone itself, which improves accuracy and reduces any double or undercounting. So the geofence tools really help with that. The high-definition imagery as well that we get as a result of the drone survey allows us to break down the wildlife population into species, sex, and age class. So when collecting in the field, we add in multiple data sets into field maps, and that really helps with orientation and accuracy during the survey, so we know exactly where we're seeing the wildlife and how we record it. We are working on some of the machine learning and recognition as well, so that'll be a feature in the future, no doubt. And we use points when we're recording, and that symbology, we've got our own colour and shape coding scheme, which we use in the outputs, which I'll show in a minute. So most of our flight points we can do on the forest network or near a road, so we've got a vehicle there, and that acts as the sort of base when we're collecting this data. But where access is prohibited, especially on large landscapes, we can use ATVs to get around with the drone equipment. Where there's a shoreline or a large loch, this was the study site here, which is Atlantic rainforest, we can actually go use a powerboat to get along, so the drone's flying alongside. And then if all else fails, we use a backpack, but we're limited with weights and batteries, and that's the last resort if we can help it. So to show you the technology working in the drone with those 3 cameras that I mentioned earlier, this is an FLS conifer site. This was June this year, and the forest structure here wouldn't allow any sort of penetration from the ground if you're on, on the ground. So the video starts with this wide angle of the forest. You flick to thermal, you see the 3 images there, and then the optical zoom kicks in, and you see the adult female red deer. So that, in essence, shows you the 3 cameras working. And when you take an image or a video, you get all 3 cameras recording that at the same time. So you can really see how you can get down the breakdown of species and age class, etc. In this clip, you can see how handy it is to record numbers. In this case, this is a group of red stags. And yeah, this imagery you can review back away from the field. So what's really, really great in terms of what we're using with the Esri products is we can, and for FLS as the client, is when we're recording in the field, they get the data through onto their system essentially live if they want to, because of using AGOL and the online system. Once the survey is complete, further analysis is done in ArcPro. We have our dashboards to do quick analysis of given areas, and then we've obviously got the imagery as well. So it's the combination of utilizing the dashboard, ArcPro, and the imagery that is our main output. Then the output that everyone wants to see in its sort of hard form is the map or the visualization of that population. So I mentioned about the symbology. So here is color-coordinated and proportionally sized symbology showing a population. We can also do it on 3D mapping as well, and then heat maps as well really draws out the concentrations of deer in that given forest. And almost as a byproduct in some ways of us doing this survey, our GIS dataset is now becoming quite significant from a national picture point of view, because not only is it starting to do distribution, it's actually got density attached to it, minimum population density across the UK, which is the first time this data set exists. So this is just 12 months of data. It was over 40,000 deer, and this is 5 out of the 6 species of deer in the UK. So it's really starting to become a valuable resource the more surveys we do. So I'm just going to pass you on to Doug now to talk about the future challenges, next steps.
So as you can see, the work that BH Wildlife Consultancy are doing with drones in connection with our use of the ArcGIS platform is giving us some really, really good insights into the spatial distribution of wild deer in Scotland. And that allows us to manage their impacts on trees and fragile habitats. So what's next for us? Some of the future challenges that we're going to be working on include building better species distribution maps at the national level. And we think there's some really great potential to use AI to speed up the process of analysing that data and identifying species. We also think there's more value to be had from some of the technology on board the drones, things like the laser rangefinders, and to integrate that with the Esri products so we can be more precise and further speed up the surveys. And all this is going to be really helpful for us as we seek to do our bit for Scotland's 2030 target to halt the loss of biodiversity and the 2040 target for net zero as a nation, in which tree planting is a big priority. And we're also going to be taking our FLS wildlife management dashboard and moving it from a private beta to a public beta to improve the openness, transparency, and collaboration with other land managers, because making things open is going to make things better for us. So really just to summarize what we've talked about this morning, we now have this single integrated spatial data platform with ArcGIS that gives us ease of access to our data for so many more people in our organization. And we have an open and transparent approach to wildlife management, thanks to good data and good tools that allow us to help gather that efficiently and share it with multiple audiences. And the drone technology and the Esri mobile apps have absolutely transformed our field data collection as an organization. We can now obtain actual confirmed minimum population levels for deer instantly. And that approach allows us to acquire and use the data in literally minutes instead of months. We can then easily share that information across FLS and with the neighbouring land managers that we work with and collaborate at a landscape scale to manage deer. And the ability to capture that data easily and then share it out in real time has cut huge amounts of time out of process, and in the field it's allowing us to be more efficient. As I said, minutes instead of months to capture this data and then be able to use it. We've secured improvements in our operational delivery. We're able to target staff to where they can have most impact by quickly guiding them to the problem areas so they spend less time trying to find the problem deer and more time actually managing it. So ultimately, the drone technologies with the Esri software has been an absolute game changer for us in terms of informing wildlife management, which is often quite an emotive and controversial subject. And we're seeing reductions in the negative impacts of deer on our trees and woodlands. And that means more healthy, regenerating landscapes like this, which is good for the people, good for biodiversity, and good for timber production. Thank you very much. So we're going to hand over to Catherine and Eve now, who are going to say a little bit more about Glen Crerran and some of the data and how it can be used.
Thank you, Doug and Ben, for demonstrating how drone capture can be used to better inform wildlife management plans. Hearing about this is actually what inspired the premise for our session. I'm Eve, and this is Catherine, and we're going to be exploring the power of imagery when applied to existing data. Now, Forestry and Land Scotland has been kind enough to lend us their deer sightings data, captured by BH Wildlife Consultancy. This, coupled with high-resolution imagery and terrain data, is what will allow us to better understand the environment and surrounding wildlife of the stunning Glen Crerran, while simultaneously showing how you could apply imagery workflows to your own existing data. Now, this is the Glen in question, which I was able to accurately visualize using data from our partners at Blue Sky Imagery and OS Terrain Data. And it is truly breathtaking, with its mature forests, cascading waterfalls, and according to my brother, prime foraging locations. You can see why Catherine and I were fascinated to learn more about this terrain. And this visualization is just the beginning. Using the data provided by FLS, Catherine is now going to take us through how you can gain insights into your existing data using ArcGIS.
I'm going to begin processing the survey data using ArcGIS drone to map. I'll create a new project and navigate to my survey images. Image metadata will be extracted and I can load the data in. Immediately I can see over 400 survey images have been georeferenced on the map. I'll begin visually exploring this data, symbolizing by altitude. This immediately gives me an indication for the terrain in which this data was captured. Clicking on a yellow point at a lower altitude, I can begin to identify individual deer species and the habitat they were sighted in. Switching to the 3D map, I can contrast this to an image captured at a higher altitude, showing the deer on much steeper ground. This really helps bring the imagery to life, viewing the sighting data in context of the surrounding landscape. Using FLS's drone data, I have pre-processed a 2D image collection. This includes the oblique imagery as well as a footprint layer showing me the survey coverage. Using drone to map, you can process a number of 2D and 3D imagery products. These can be published directly to ArcGIS Online for use in subsequent analysis or web applications. But if you don't have a drone, you don't need to worry, because Eve is now going to take us through how high-resolution satellite imagery can be leveraged on ArcGIS Online to provide further context to our survey area.
Catherine has just demonstrated the power of imagery processing, and I'm hoping to expand on that. Imagery isn't limited to visualization. It offers a broad range of uses to be able to analyze and better understand your area of interest. And one way to harness this power of imagery is through ArcGIS Image for ArcGIS Online, an extension which empowers users to work with vector and imagery data seamlessly across the ArcGIS system. And it's simple to choose a layer that suits your needs, bring in your layer configuration, and then drag and drop local content into ArcGIS Online. Now, I've pre-uploaded this imagery so we can just dive right into our exploration. And this is Glen Craren. Using ArcGIS Image for ArcGIS Online, you're able to stream, host, and analyze imagery all within the cloud. And using Map Viewer, which is the interface that we're currently in, you can take these visualizations and analysis further, which is what we're going to begin to do now. And we'll start with processing templates. Now, processing templates are a filter over your data, acting as an instant rendering with no additional credit cost. The interface is very similar to Model Builder, where you can chain functions together, and then you can share these with colleagues to minimize duplication efforts. Or you can take advantage of raster function templates, which are already available in the Living Atlas or in ArcGIS Online. In this case, I've created one for NDVI. NDVI is the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, which helps identify the health and density of vegetation, ranking pixels on a scale from -1 to 1, where our areas of red represent either bare soil or rock or areas of poor vegetation health, and then the surrounding areas of green are representative of more dense vegetation. Now, these processing templates, while great for a quick visualization, are simply an informational layer with no data beneath them. So if you're interested in having an output to conduct further investigations with, this is when I would instead recommend our analysis tools. Now, as you can see, there are a diverse range to choose from to support you in whatever workflow that you're facing. And in this case, we're going to stick with NDVI. You can select your raster and the corresponding bands, and then give a sensible name for your layer. Now, unlike the processing templates, which incur no additional costs, analysis tools do consume credits. And with the handy Estimate Credit button, it's easy to keep track of those. Now, for an area of this size, it takes roughly a few minutes to run. And if you're curious, the Glen is roughly 8,000 hectares, or an equivalent of 8,064 rugby pitches. But I will always see this as 15,000 American football fields, which is how you know I've spent far too much time growing up in the States. But to save time, I have preloaded our analysis. And there we have it. This is a snapshot into the vegetative health of the Glen in 2020, with our more mature forests and then some rocky mountain tops. Now, with all of the variety of analysis tools that we have, think about the breadth of information that you could gain from a single imagery layer. Or if you have imagery from across multiple time periods, think about how you could monitor change over time and use that to inform your decision making. This is what I was pondering when I created this instant app, which studies the landscape of Glen Craren over the course of 2 years, from 2020 to 2022. And I was especially interested with this middle section, where you can begin to see how the land is regenerating after a clear fell. Not only does this demonstrate how effective imagery can be when it comes to monitoring change, but when paired with high-resolution imagery, thanks to blue sky, we're also able to pick up on these more minute details, like this path, or pick up on other features of interest. So this imagery when coupled with our existing deer sightings, gives us a more holistic visual to better understand patterns as to where the deer are clustering. And this has me thinking, what other characteristics of the landscape do deer gravitate towards? And can we use the analysis tools to better understand this question? Well, we're going to give it a go, and we are going to start with one of my other favorite analysis tools, which capitalizes on deep learning and what's available to you within the Living Atlas. Again, we'll put in our blue sky imagery, and we can have a browse as to some of the many pre-trained options available within the Living Atlas, settling on one for landscape cover. Now, these models can be brought directly in with no additional configuration needed. And as someone with very minimal experience when it comes to machine learning, knowing that I'm not going to have to spend the time manually classifying this land myself, nor do I have to learn how to train my own model to do so, means that I am saving a lot of time and resources. And I still end up with this snazzy looking output, which classifies my land for me. Now, leaning on a few other tools available within the ArcGIS image for ArcGIS Online extension, and another data layer provided by OS Terrain, which is their digital terrain model, we are able to quickly derive the slope using the slope analysis tool. And this means that with 2 data layers and a handful of tools, we've been able to come up with all of these outputs, which just demonstrates how powerful imagery can be to mine a variety of information. Think about how this could apply to any of your workflows. And this just scratches the surface of what's available to you with ArcGIS image for ArcGIS Online. Using this, coupled with our imagery, we've been able to better understand where these deer are and how it can inform our wildlife management planning so that we can protect these areas of vegetative regrowth that Doug and Ben were mentioning earlier, and use them to inform against overpopulations of deer. So with the imagery outputs that we've created, along with what's been processed earlier, Catherine is now going to put all of this together into one focused application. So take it away, Catherine.
So now our analysis is complete, we need a tool to effectively communicate and engage with key stakeholders. To do that, I've created an experience builder application, which has given me ultimate flexibility to create a customized and tailored web app. The app begins with a splash screen providing some context to users. Clicking Explore will take me to the home page, where I can see the deer sightings data displayed using clustering. As I zoom and pan, these clusters will dynamically update, and I can click on a point to find more about how many deer were sighted at that location. I can also filter the survey data by zone using these toggles on the left-hand side. This allows users to really delve into the data of interest to them. The navigation buttons on the top right will allow me to change pages in this application. Switching to the drone imagery page loads the orientated imagery widget. This makes use of that survey footprint layer I processed earlier in Drone to Map. Clicking on a point in the footprint, the image captured at that location will load up on the right-hand pane. I can see the red cross on my image marks the corresponding point on the map. As I zoom into this image, the footprint will dynamically update, allowing an immersive experience viewing the imagery from the perspective of the drone. The final page in this application brings together Eve's analysis outputs. I can toggle the different layers on and off, so we have the NDVI data, the slope information, and the land use classification. If I'm interested in a particular sightings location, I can click on that point, and these indicators on the left-hand side will update. I can see the land use at that location, the number of deer sighted, the NDVI, and the slope data. This application also makes use of the Near Me widget. If I pan to another area of interest, I can click Update Results, and the number of deer sighted in this map extent and the terrain features, the average slope, and the NDVI information will be shown to me. So today we have shown how you can bring your organisation's existing data and combine this with powerful imagery analysis to bring further insight into your study area. Eve showed some powerful imagery tools that were all done within the browser on ArcGIS Online. And I've brought this together in one tailored application to really ensure we're sharing this data with the people who need to see it. And finally, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Forestry and Land Scotland and BH Wildlife Consultancy for leading the approach in this space and for letting us use their data in this presentation. Thank you.